Welcome back to Under the Hood with Dr. Sunshine. Um, I am back in this recorded video to speak on a topic that is sensitive, one that is, I believe, timely, and one that I believe deserves attention at this time. And that's on the topic of mental health in STEM fields. STEM being science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. In some settings, M is medicine. I'm here today in response to the devastating news about the loss of two Black chemistry graduate students, one at UCLA and one at Northwestern University. This happened at the end of last week, where the news swept academic Twitter and it swept the Black in X and Black in professional spaces, and it hit everyone very hard. Not only because these two students were highly influential in their leadership in STEM, in their efforts to create inclusive environments for graduate researchers who are historically marginalized in those spaces. So, outwardly, it would seem that these students, while they may have been struggling behind the scenes, outwardly it seemed like they were strong and courageous leaders in the fields of in the field of chemistry. This brought about a wave of condolences and well wishes and honestly messages of hope, messages of advice about how to cope during this time by quite a few Black STEM professionals, particularly those in academia. First, I'd like to send my condolences to the family and friends and colleagues of the two graduate students. Um, it was also really tough for me to see this happen. I am an advisor and I work with students of all backgrounds, but I am always thinking about how academia may be influencing my mentees, both informal and formal. Hence, why this site exists. This is why Under the Hood exists, to lift the veil of uncertainty on a career path that is full of uncertainty. So, if I can provide some context, some advice about what to expect along the way, hopefully that will reduce the uncertainty that really and oftentimes leads to a deterioration of mental health along this journey. And so I want to talk about some of the inadvertent and deliberate triggers for declining mental health for people that are in this space. And then I'll end this video talking about things that we can do individually to combat the things that trigger adverse mental health impacts. All right. So first, I'll start with things, especially at the graduate level, that inadvertently lead to a deterioration of mental health for people that are pursuing higher or terminal degrees in STEM. Okay. So for number one, the biggest thing that triggers, or in my opinion, that triggers uh, any graduate student, regardless of their background, is uncertainty. Okay. So people are usually drawn to STEM because they like to be able to predict, they like to be able to problem solve and and find solutions. They are oftentimes high performers when it comes to STEM coursework, and so likely being able to get admitted to high profile programs that are rigorous means that they've demonstrated a history of problem solving, of figuring things out, of figuring out the unknown. Therefore, upon entering graduate school, the whole purpose is to conduct research to answer questions for which answers have not been posed, which is the exact opposite of the training that leads up to graduate school, such that there is a rubric, there is an answer key, and there's a solution for every problem that has been presented to the student. And so then you get into graduate school and there is no answer, there is no solution. And for people that thrive on having an answer to a problem, this can drive mental health issues and uncertainty, particularly if they don't have mentors and advisors to tell them that it's normal. That it's normal for experiments to fail. It's normal to bump your head when you're trying to figure out a new area of science that just hasn't been fully characterized yet. Some students or some graduate researchers think that if things are unknown or uncertain, that there's something wrong with them. And it's not. It's the nature of what we do. And unfortunately, this does not get relayed to many of the graduate researchers, and that leads to mental health issues. Graduate research is the exact opposite of the training that we receive in K through 12 and undergraduate. So this leads me to point number 2 of the inadvertent triggers for declining mental health in graduate school. And it links to number 1, and that's perfectionism. Okay? Perfectionism. 9 times out of 10, if someone has been admitted to a graduate program, likely grades were perfect, extracurricular activities were perfect, and generally the student has been successful in most of the things that they've attempted to do leading up to graduate research. Grad school is full of imperfect moments. So if it's the first time somebody is entering into an environment that is full of roadblocks and stumbling blocks and opportunities for imperfection, that will trigger mental health issues. It will trigger a loss of confidence. It will trigger a lowering of one's self-esteem. So once again, it is up to the student and the advisors and the mentors to work together to dispel this myth that one has to be perfect, one has to have a perfect dissertation, one has to have perfect performance every day along the graduate journey, because it's just not the truth. And the same is true for me. So I'll say that I had my awakening about perfectionism and uncertainty as an undergraduate student early on. And this is coming from someone who was the valedictorian of her high school class. So one of the best lessons I could have learned early on is that I don't know everything. And I will be in sitting with uncertainty, and I will make mistakes over and over again along my graduate journey, because that's the nature of what we do. So I'm here to tell anyone who is struggling or who is being down on themselves about mistakes and failed experiments that it's okay. How on earth can you be perfect at something you've never done before and never received training for? It's okay. The most important part of the graduate journey is getting back in the lab, getting back on the computer, sitting back in front of the paper, and to face those activities with the knowledge that it's okay if it's not perfect. Number 3, one other thing that will trigger mental health issues in graduate research is something that's inadvertent, and that's cultural differences between your mentees, mentors, and your graduate research community. So, inadvertently, these environments oftentimes lead us to be in environments where no one shares our cultural background. Okay? People brush this off many times as if it doesn't matter because STEM is supposed to be a sterile environment and one that is objective and free of emotion and culture and cultural biases. And this is simply not true. As universities and graduate programs are becoming more accessible to people from various different backgrounds, there are circumstances for which you could be spending the majority of your time with people who are from different backgrounds. Inadvertently, this may lead to a decline in mental health, particularly if the communication style is different from what you're used to. If words mean different things in different cultures, so there are more opportunities to offend one another. And particularly for Black researchers, whether you're Black American or whether you are Black from another country, this can be especially stark because we are in few number in the research space, particularly for STEM fields. So it is not uncommon to show up to lab, to show up to class as a graduate student, and you're the only person that shares your cultural background. So oftentimes there's code switching where you put on you use a different lexicon, you use a different intonation of your voice, you say different things, and in effect, you put yourself and your full self on the back burner when you enter into spaces where you're the only person that represents your culture. And having to dampen your authenticity to survive in an environment that doesn't have many people like you can deteriorate one's mental health. It takes a lot more energy to be someone you're not than it is to just be your authentic self. This is one of the hardest parts really about being underrepresented in STEM because you're spending 8 to 9 hours a day or even up to 12 hours a day if you're in the lab all the time, literally just using language, um, adhering to customs, talking about things that you're just doing to create camaraderie with your colleagues. And if you come from a background where you didn't spend a lot of time outside of your own culture, this can be extreme culture shock. Okay, so we shouldn't minimize how important it is to maintain a high level of cultural awareness and even uh, keep the links to our own cultures very strong because that is how our identity is formed, and it's important to honor that identity. And I encourage people to, and I'll get into the encouragements at the end of this video, to be aware of when they are facing a cultural difference in the lab, and quickly try to rectify that. If it's a loss of translation, then we can simply just say, hey, I didn't know that was offensive. Can we move past that? Another thing, number 4, things that will inadvertently trigger one's mental health. And I say inadvertent because a lot of times people that offend others with microaggressions don't know it. And that leads me to number 4, which is microaggressions. Okay. So I liken microaggressions to be death by 1,000 cuts. Little tiny stings that, if they happen over and over in quick succession, more times than one is comfortable with, it could lead to a deterioration of mental health, especially if it happens a lot. So pointing back to number 3, like when it comes to microaggressions, these are oftentimes happening because of a lack of cultural awareness about what's offensive and what's not, such as someone reaching out to touch a Black person's hair. Um, it is seen that is seen as a huge offense for Black people, but but culturally, it may not seem that way for other people. All right. So another thing in regard to microaggression is jokes. Okay. Not everything is funny to everyone. And so jokes can often be perceived as microaggressions if they are offensive to someone in a different culture. Um, Microaggressions, things that are said and are relayed that point to or make fun of someone's protected characteristics, race, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, things like that. Those things, especially in a high stress environment, can be really detrimental for people's mental health. And so there's sometimes when we're in the lab, we think that we're comfortable enough to make jokes and make comments about things. And if you're in a highly stressful situation where there's a lot of uncertainty and you're fighting against imperfection and perfectionism, microaggressions can really hurt. The other thing that may be inadvertently triggering one's mental health is isolation. So there's a tendency to isolate and want to be alone, particularly for introverted people that are partaking in graduate research. And most mental health professionals advise against isolating when one is feeling down or feeling beat up along the STEM journey. And so inadvertently, it's a cycle of having negative feelings in the STEM journey and then isolating, which leads to more negative thoughts, which leads to more isolation. So this inadvertently will cause a decline in mental health, even though the person may be trying to isolate to protect themselves. So we just need to be on the lookout for ways in which we try to cope that may inadvertently be making the situation worse. Okay, next I want to talk about mental health triggers that are done deliberately. So these are deliberate things that happen along the STEM journey, particularly for underrepresented people, Black people, and that's exclusion. So when you find out that the entire lab or a group of students has gone to do XYZ and no one invited you, that's deliberate exclusion for whatever reason. Whatever the reason is, it's exclusion, and that can really lead to one feeling left out, which can trigger negative mental health impacts. Number two, the cold shoulder. So that's different from exclusion. So exclusion is inviting everyone else but not inviting you, or including, it's the opposite of inclusivity. The cold shoulder is simply being less friendly or people are less warm to one person in particular because of whatever reason. And sometimes these things are done on purpose in STEM spaces. Okay. And if it becomes clear that this is happening to you, or it's really difficult to reason around that. I don't recommend people that are experiencing exclusion and a cold shoulder to try to reason their way out of it, because then that turns into self-gaslighting. It turns into trying to convince yourself that what you're experiencing isn't real. It's probably real. And we'll talk about what you should do when you're facing those deliberate mental health triggers. Okay. So If you're experiencing things that you know that you shouldn't be experiencing, you're not being included in things, it's best to accept it for what it is, see it for what it is, and don't try to conform or lie to yourself about what you're experiencing. And number 3, which is kind of similar to the other 2 deliberate mental health triggers, is differential treatment. And so this is likely going to be something that occurs from the advisor or someone in a authority role or a supervisory role. And so if you're in grad school and you know that your advisor is treating you differently, that could be an extreme mental health trigger. Okay. So I try as hard as I can to just treat all of my trainees the same. Okay. Everyone gets the same amount of time. Everyone has access to my calendar. Everyone gets the same spiel. We do group mentor advising and things like that. So that, the students don't feel like they're getting unfair treatment. Usually the way that advisors should avoid the differential treatment is to say the same thing to everyone. Okay, if you wouldn't say something to one student, if you wouldn't say something to all your students, would you say it to one? Don't say it. If you can't extend the same treatment or the same help to all students, don't give it to one. Just be fair and treat everyone the same. That doesn't mean that you don't make adjustments for people that need accommodations, obviously, right? But the differential treatment is a pretty strong mental health trigger. That's usually stems from getting different treatment from someone that's in a supervisory role. So if you're in that situation, then it's oftentimes beneficial to have mentors outside of your main supervisor. So let's get into what we can do in the last few minutes about combating the inadvertent and deliberate triggers of declining mental health. And so, number 1, I would say that the most important thing when you're entering your graduate journey is to have a strong sense of self. So, having a strong sense of self is really, really knowing your own strengths and weaknesses to a T. Knowing those strengths and weaknesses, honoring them, and being honest about them. That way, what someone says to you won't be a trigger for insecurity, for a lack of confidence, for whatever. Okay? The only person that you have something to prove to is yourself and ultimately your dissertation committee. But day to day, no one can tell you something that you already know about yourself, right? So having a strong sense of self also means knowing when emotions and feelings are generated from your own conflicts, internal conflicts, and whether or not your feelings are being triggered by external forces. Okay? So being able to separate external triggers versus your own internal triggers is really important. Okay? Because a lot of times, and I say this all the time on my other social medias, 90% of what people say to us is projection. Meaning, what they're saying is a reflection of how they feel about themselves. And you really shouldn't take that personally. We shouldn't take personally about 90% of the things that people say to us. So when you really know yourself, you know your own strengths and weaknesses. If someone's coming up to you and telling you that you got something because of your protected characteristic, you'll know it's a lie. because you know that you've worked hard. You have eyes and you can see your own CV, and you know that that is a lie, and you know that that person is projecting their own insecurity because perhaps they received their position because of their protected characteristic. Also, you have to know your own limitations. Okay, so you can't let other people set expectations for your productivity, for your successes. The only people you really should be listening to about what you can and cannot do are people that have walked your path and they've done it successfully. So, your mentors, your advisors, or senior graduate students who are about to graduate, all right, maybe they can give you an informed viewpoint about what your limitations may be. And be careful about those advices because you want to make sure that the advices are coming from a sincere place and that people aren't projecting their own insecurities. And so I also have to be careful when I'm talking to my mentees not to project things that have happened to me. So lessons learned from things that have happened to me along my journey that they will probably never experience. And so whenever I'm talking to my mentee, I always say take it with a grain of salt, weigh it against your own experiences, and ultimately you have to decide whether or not my advice is relevant to you or not. Okay. Number two, combating the triggers for declining mental health is having strong external relationships outside of academia. It's important to have good boundaries between your social life, personal life, and your professional life. The more that those boundaries are blurred, the more often times, or if there's not healthy balance between the two, you could end up in a situation where the mental health is declining because if all of the eggs are in the professional basket and things go wrong, there's no balance. There's nothing to look forward to. There's nothing to balance out the highs and lows of your professional experience. Okay. Something else you can do to combat the mental health stressors is professional therapy, right? Whether that's medicated or unmedicated therapy. I have explored a few of these routes that have been helpful to me in different ways along my academic career. You just need to find what's best for you. As graduate students, we oftentimes provide health insurance for you, and so you can go to your uh, university health center to get therapy, or you can use an in-network provider. Number four, combating mental health triggers. I'd say one should seek a variety of mentors who can provide guidance. It's important to get advice from different people, okay? Because at the point where you're in graduate school and enter into a postdoc, there's no right way to do anything. So as opposed to K through 12 and undergrad, the path is very prescribed, okay? You can follow the handbook, you can do a certain set of steps of things to get a 5.0 GPA and get an athletic scholarship. When it comes to graduate school, it's not one size fits all, and especially postdoc and faculty. So, listening to people who are qualified to give you good advice, especially outside of your academic advisor, is very, very important. This way, if your advisor is telling you something that might be harmful and not helpful, you'll be able to balance that with advice that may be more productive. Number five, I would encourage people who are isolated or the only person from their culture in a research lab. I would advise them to seek online relationships or online support groups and outlets. And so, the beauty of the internet and social media allows us to be connected across space and time. And these could be pretty helpful connections. You know, if you're studying in the middle of nowhere and you're the only person like you, it may be helpful to join these groups online, whether that's the Black In groups, AAPI in Geosciences, Geo Latina, SACNAS. These could be really helpful for helping you gauge or just having a sense of uh, familiarity, where people can understand your quirks. You don't have to explain anything, and you can let down the code switching for a minute and just be yourself. And that will reduce some of the pressures there are in your day to day to conform to a set of behaviors that allows you to navigate across different cultures. All right. Because the graduate environment is multicultural. The students, not maybe not so much the faculty, but definitely other students. And number 6, I would encourage everyone to develop a strong sense of purpose if you're on the STEM academic track, whether graduate school, postdoc, or faculty. Really, you have to just develop a strong sense of purpose of why you're doing this. Money is not a good, strong sense of purpose. It's not sustainable. Um, Fame is not a good sense of purpose for what it takes to maintain focus and motivation for the work we're doing. Anytime I start to feel run down or unmotivated to continue to carry on life as a professor, I remind myself of my purpose, and that's personal to me, which oftentimes outweighs the nonsense that comes along with just being someone with a different cultural identity, um, in an environment where we're all coming together to work on a common issue or a common problem or a common research objective. As long as I keep my eye on that purpose, it keeps me motivated to invest in things that build me up. Right. I hope this was helpful. This is all I really wanted to talk about in terms of mental health. Mental health deterioration is real in graduate school for all of the reasons that I listed, the inadvertent reasons, the deliberate reasons, and I listed a few things that we can do individually to combat that. Also, we need to know that these periods of uncertainties come in waves, okay? You're always going to be fighting against your nature to self-criticize and feel down on yourself, but just know that it comes in waves. Also, the more uncertain your path is, the more anxiety that's going to trigger. So it's important for you to sit down and have a plan for yourself, whether you're working that plan out with your advisor or not, and have an end goal in mind, okay? Have your own deadlines in mind. When it comes to solving research problems, I always tell my students we have plan A, plan B, and plan C. We have ambitious goals. We have reasonable goals. That reduces the uncertainty in the work. So goal setting and making sure that what's on your plate is reasonable and feasible also reduces some of the uncertainty and anxiety around being marginalized in STEM or just being a graduate student in general. My final word is to encourage every Black woman, every Black man, every Black non-binary person to keep your head up. Okay. Remember why you started this journey in the first place. And remember not to internalize some of the harmful messaging that we receive both online and in person. Because once again, most of the things, the negative things that are said to us are reflections of other people's biases, triggers, and nonsense. And you really just cannot internalize that. You can, however, stand up for yourself with the proper channels, whether that's Title IX, going to your supervisor. There are ways to address microaggressions and overt mistreatments. Okay, there are ways to do this that don't jeopardize you, that don't that also don't reduce your own credibility. If you'd like to hear me talk more about any of the things that I've talked about, please leave a comment or please submit a response in the Google form that I'll link in the description box. My email address, my business email, is also linked to my YouTube channel's About page. And with that, I wish everyone the best and keep your head up.